Winchester is part of the American fabric. It's part of our culture. It's part of our heritage. It's a company that was there as our nation was expanding, as they were heading across the plains. It's a company that was there when our doughboys needed rifles and machine guns and BARs to go to the trenches of France. It's the first commercial gun company to make the M1 Garand. It's the company that invented the rifleman's rifle, the Model 70. It was there when the 1897 became the most popular shotgun in America. This is a company that has weathered a lot of storms. It's had ups, it's had downs. And the history of Winchester is 150 years now.
Winchester was known as the lever-action rifle company. They wanted a lever-action shotgun, and by golly, John Browning designed one for them, the Model 1887. And as lever-action shotguns go, with that great big huge swing, it was a pretty good lever-action shotgun. He stayed after it. A few years later, went one better with a very fine pump-action design with an exposed hammer, the Model 1893, with a few refinements, became the Model 1897. It sold a million copies over a very long production life. A very, very fine pump-action shotgun. John Moses Browning design, Winchester production.
In the 1890s, there were two other significant Winchester designs, the first of which was the 1895 lever action. This is a John Moses Browning design, and it solved the problem of pointed bullets and lever action rifles. The problem with tubular magazines, and again, tubular magazines, everybody thought that was the way to go back then. You put a pointed, ballistically efficient Spitzer bullet in there, and you end up with a sharp cartridge nose up against your primer, which is bad. When under recoil, when you have cartridges detonating in your tubular magazine, that's a problem. John Moses Browning came up with the Model 1895, and it's really the strongest of the lever actions, and it could chamber high-pressure, small-bore military cartridges, the 30-40 Krag, the 30-03, the 30-06. Really, the 95's most prolific cartridge was the 7.62 by 54 Russian-rimmed cartridge. Hundreds of thousands of those guns were made for the Tsar. But with the 1895 Russian, it could also be a clip-loading design. They could use the stripper clip from a Mosin Nagant and chuck them into that magazine that is down below the action that would hold 5 rounds. Around the turn of the century, John Moses Browning figured out how to make gas-operated guns work. He also figured out how to make recoil-operated guns work. So in this era, you have all these just wonderful John Moses Browning-based designs turning into guns like the Winchester self-loaders, the early Winchester recoil-operated autoloaders. One of the problems with those guns, of course, was a cartridge limitation. Much like there was a cartridge limitation on the early lever actions, you just could not get like a 30-06 cartridge into that style of autoloader. The recoil operation of those guns precluded it. But you also ended up with guns like the Winchester 1903, chambered for a proprietary Winchester rimfire cartridge, the 22 WMR. And the 1903 was a delightful, beautiful little gun, and really set America on the path of a love for autoloading rifles.
Want to know what's happening at American Rifleman? Follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. We'll be right back.
Just as Winchester rifles played a critical role in the westward expansion of the country and were an iconic evidence of that company's involvement in American life at that time, Winchester came to the rescue for the American military. And during World War I, World War II, Vietnam provided long arms, shotguns, and rifles that saw serious combat and made a big difference in terms of, again, this country winning its freedom on the international front. So Winchester is a real American institution. It's not just a brand, and it's not just a company. It's an icon that played a critical role in the development of this nation and in the defense of this nation.
You look at Winchester and you say, well, the U.S. Army never adopted a lever action, Winchester. Why didn't they ever bring the 94 out? And in a lot of cases, no, a Winchester rifle, lever action rifle, was never the service standard shoulder arm of this country. Although they did make M1 Grands, which were the standard service arm of this country back in World War II. They made the M1 carbine. They made Eddystone 1917 rifles during the First World War. They made a number of guns that were used by the United States military. And in fact, Winchester 1895s and 94s, both lever actions, were bought in small quantities and used for different specialty outfits during both the First and the Second World War.
Now, in the immediate post-war era, Winchester started introducing other new designs. In particular, the Winchester Model 54 rifle. It was the forerunner of the Model 70, the rifleman's rifle, another gun that came out in that post-war era. And frankly, this is genius. What are you going to do right as the Great Depression hits? Introduce probably the strongest American-made side-by-side shotgun, and that's the Winchester Model 21. And so Winchester at this time was owned by John Olin. He, of course, was the owner of Western Cartridge Company, and this is where the Winchester Western brand comes together. So now you have Winchester Repeating Arms Company, Western Powder and Ammunition Company. They're joined together. So you have a company that makes cartridges and rifles and shotguns.
Winchester and Remington were heavy competitors for the United States sporting arms market. Remington had good products. They weren't doing as well. They started looking at some modern production techniques, including castings and stampings. Remington came up with a couple of very fine designs with these more cost-efficient manufacturing techniques. Winchester took a look at this, and they concluded that to maintain their market share and to try to improve their market share, they had to be competitive in manufacturing techniques. So in 1964, they adopted the new manufacturing techniques, and 1964 is the cutoff year to many of the die-hard Winchester aficionados who appreciated the fine machining and forgings of the Winchester products up to that date. Post-64 Winchester products worked great. They just weren't the original pre-64 Winchester classics.
That was kind of the beginning of the end in a lot of ways for Winchester firearms. And of course, John Olin had retired, and he was really the lifeblood of that company for so long. And the company ended up getting split. The ammunition division was spun off from the rifle division. The rifle division was sold. Now, the Winchester Ammunition, which owns the Winchester name, Olin Corporation, very successful company. Those guys make great ammo. They have a new plant down in Oxford, Mississippi that's state-of-the-art. That company is separate from the rifle company of today. After the rifle and shotgun business was spun off, it became the U.S. Repeating Arms Company. And the U.S. Repeating Arms Company struggled. They were making Model 70s, they were making 1300 pump-action shotguns, and of course they were making 94 Winchesters. But even those guns were pretty expensive to produce. And U.S. Repeating Arms Company had a series of owners, one of which was Giat, a big French arms conglomerate that also owned FN. And Browning FN ended up as the licensee for Winchester rifles and shotguns.
Winchester's gone through up and downs. They started out flopping around with the early volcanic production before Oliver Winchester took that in hand. They've gone through at least a couple of bankruptcies. But Winchester is probably one of the best known product names in the world. It's Coca-Cola. It's the American rifle.